The first thing I want to drive home about addiction is that addiction is really just a symptom. It's not the actual issue. And we'll get to that in a second. But usually the reason we'll use addiction or we'll use, drugs, alcohol, porn, gambling, women, men, buying things we don't need or whatever it might be is because there's a sense of us missing something within ourselves that we're trying to cover up or we're trying to numb something. And this is literally the same thing that's come up for every single person that I've worked with when it came to doing the addiction side of things. Legends, welcome to another episode of the Interchange podcast, and thank you for joining me, your host, Ben Lowe. Now, before we go any further, I do have a very small favor to ask, and that is if you have been enjoying the content, even just the slightest little bit, if you could please do me a massive favor and go and hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to share this with just one of your friends that you feel might get something out of this. As you know, the more eyes and ears we can get on the podcast, the bigger and better guests I can bring for you guys, and in turn, the more value I'm going to be able to deliver. Now, over to today's episode. It's a solo episode with me. I'm sorry you don't get any guests today, but I'm going to be diving into something that comes up a lot for me with the people that I'm working with when it comes to the self-worth and habits coaching, and that is addiction. Now, when we hear the word addiction, it sounds like such a negative thing. You've got drug addicts, you've got gambling addicts, you've got sex addicts, you've got porn addicts, you've got all these things, and they're made out to be such a bad thing, right? We have this tarnished version or tarnished vision of what addiction actually is. And, they say that people have this addictive personality. Well, I think that everyone has an addictive personality to some degree because we all get addicted to something that we want to do in life, right? But a lot of people tend to obviously go the wrong way, which would be giving into the things that give them that sense of external validation. Now, the first thing I want to drive home about addiction is that addiction is really just a symptom. It's not the actual issue. And we'll get to that in a second. But usually the reason we'll use addiction or we'll use, drugs, alcohol, porn, gambling, women, men, buying things we don't need or whatever it might be is because there's a sense of us missing something within ourselves that we're trying to cover up or we're trying to numb something. And this is literally the same thing that's come up for every single person that I've worked with when it came to doing the addiction side of things. And that comes back to a lack of self-worth. Now, I heard this term a long time ago, or this sentence a long time ago, and it goes something like this. So there's only two reasons that people use drugs and alcohol, and that is because they feel like they need to be more good or feel like they want to be less bad. And at the time, it didn't really sit with me too well. But after doing the work that I do now, and obviously sitting with a lot of people and seeing them go through this, it really just drives it home that it always comes back to self-worth. So addiction is such a negative word, like I said. So a lot of the time, what I'll do with my clients is actually reframe this because the addiction they have, once upon a time, it wouldn't have been an addiction. It would have been something that they did to serve a purpose, or in other words, a habit that served them. But now, after obviously relying on that for so long for their happiness, whether it be the drugs, the alcohol, the women, the gambling, you name it, all these things that they're using for external validation, it's now become an addiction because they're so lost on how to feel good within themselves without these things that it's something that they need to actually reach that baseline for themselves every day. And so this is true to everything I've just spoken about, whether it be, like I said, through drugs or substance, or through something like external validation through buying things. All of these things come back to that lack of self-worth because there is something that these people or that you are feeling like you're missing within yourself that you're trying to get from something else. Now, this can also play out in relationship dynamics with things like codependency. It comes back to, once again, missing something within yourself that you're looking for in someone else. And you get addicted to that. And even though the relationship might not be in the best place, you keep coming back for more, because in the past, you remember what that feeling was like when you were in a happy place with that person. And it becomes, once again, an addiction to the trauma, an addiction to the codependency, an addiction to the person themselves. Because once again, it comes back to missing something within yourself. So the first step to overcoming addiction, I believe, is actually looking at what the root cause is. And like I said, most of the time it's going to come back to self-worth. So take a second to take a step back and look at where the actual addiction started for you. So for me, when it comes to my journey with ice addiction, it was because, well, number one, I never felt like I fit in with anything else. I never felt like I had my place in the world. I had groups of friends, but I'd drift from group of friends to group of friends. I never really had a solid base of community, if that makes sense. And the second thing as well was I never felt like I was enough. And as you know, anyone with drugs will hang out with anyone else with drugs generally because it means that they're going to get more drugs. And all of a sudden, you've got your community. So I went through this funny stage of feeling like I was important because I was selling drugs at the time, and also feeling like I had my people because I had people around me at the time. But I can guarantee you that anyone that's been in this situation will understand this, that as soon as the party's gone, so are the people that come with it. There's literally not very much of a difference between the word friends and fiends. It's literally one letter. And so if you take that one letter away, that's exactly what I had around me at all times, was a bunch of fiends. So for me, understanding that this is what I was missing and understanding that it was because of this lack of self-worth, it allowed me to then take a step back and go, okay, cool. What are the parts of me that I need to work on? And once again, this is a slow process. It takes time. But if you can identify the actual issue itself rather than trying to treat the addiction for whatever it is, then in turn, you can actually start to make some progress. So how many times is it that you have tried to break a habit, whatever it might be, right? And then you try and try and try and try, and all of a sudden you end up back at square one. It's like nothing ever happened in the first place. And you try again, and you end up back at square one. You try again, and you end up back at square one. It's because all you're trying to address is a symptom. Okay, when it comes to the addiction side of things, it's the symptom. People go to rehab. They get out of rehab. They're doing really well for a little while. They might have done really well while they're in rehab, but all they've done then is removed the triggers and removed the environment. Yeah, taking them out of the environment where they used to use drugs and taking them away from the people they were using drugs with. So it's going to be pretty easy when you have less access and when you have less stimulation for the thing you're trying to avoid, to actually get rid of it, right? But as soon as they get put back into the environment, which is, wherever they grew up or wherever they were living beforehand, boom, all of a sudden they're back to the addiction. And it's because at the end of the day, they still haven't fixed the inner issue, the issue that they were struggling with, which once again generally comes back to the self-worth. So by identifying what the actual issue is and the reason that you started using, for instance, well, then it might be, you might have a better chance of actually being able to overcome that. So if it was, you got your heart broken in a relationship and all of a sudden you found yourself partying, drinking lots of alcohol, snorting lots of cocaine, taking lots of drugs, and then obviously this served you for a point in time. But eventually it got to a point where you are now, where you're struggling with the addiction side of things. And it's like, this isn't serving me any longer, but I just can't seem to shake it. Well, it's because you haven't actually looked at what the proper problem was behind the addiction itself. So identifying that addiction or the trigger for the addiction or the trigger for the habit would be the first step. And the second step would be looking at what you can start to do to make positive change towards that. And this is the thing that a lot of people fuck up with. They try and change everything all at once. And unfortunately, and I've said this on podcast after podcast, 95% of who you are by the age of 30 is subconscious programming. So that means that there's like 5% of you that wants to make changes and 95% of you that's like, hey, fuck that. I'm comfortable where I'm at. And even though I'm not happy there, I am comfortable. And so you'll take that step out of the comfort zone to some degree. And the subconscious mind will go, nah, bruh, let's go back to doing what we're doing because we're comfortable there. And it was easier. Because as human beings, we want to conserve energy, number one. That's our number one priority, is to survive. And so by making things run autonomously or automatically, by having habits that we do every day, things that are habitual to us, we don't have to think about them, which in turn then means that we're saving energy. And so if you are someone that's been using drugs for a very long time, it comes to Friday night, let's say, and boom, you're already on the bag. It's something that happens habitually, and before you know it, you're back in that habit. Like I said, you might do really well for a couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden you're back at square one. It's because you've tried to change everything all at once, and the subconscious mind has gone, no. Let's not do that. Let's go back to doing what we're doing because we're comfortable there and we're surviving, right? Surviving, not thriving. So my biggest piece of advice when it comes to making any changes, whether it be with addiction, whether it be with habits, whether it be with, changing environment, whatever it might be, is to try and identify the 1% or the small thing that you can start to change, right? That one small thing that you can start to change today to become 1% better today or tomorrow than you were today. So when it comes to the addiction side of things, if it's alcohol, for instance, it might be, let's say you're drinking every night. Try and go one day, just one day without drinking. It's going to feel fucking uncomfortable, but it's part of the necessary process when it comes to actually getting off alcohol. If you can do one day, you can do two. If you can do two, you can do four. If you can do four, you can do 8. If it comes to drugs, okay, once again, delete, first of all the fucking dealers' numbers out of your phone. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're really that hard up, you want to try and find it, you will. Give yourself a little bit of a barrier to entry of some kind. Maybe even, don't carry cash on yourself. Maybe even remove yourself from the environment for, let's say a week. Take yourself on holidays and take yourself to a place where you know no one. But make a small change and start to notice the shifts. If it comes to porn or gambling or anything like that, just try and go one day. one day at a time. And if you can go one day, you can go two, you can go two, you can go four, and so on and so forth. And by making these small shifts and these small changes, and rather than looking at, okay, the big thing you're trying to achieve, reverse engineering it into something small that you can actually focus on consistently doing and committing to, well, in turn, you should start to make progress. And when you see progress for yourself, it's going to start to trigger those dopamine receptors for like that reward system. And once you start to see that once you start to see that progress, and you start to see those, you start to get that dopamine flowing again, you're feeling good and you're rewarding yourself, it's going to encourage you to want to continue to go. Whereas if once again you try and change everything all at once, you'll get to a certain point, it's going to feel really uncomfortable, and then all of a sudden you'll find yourself slipping back to where you were when you started. I guess the other big thing as well when it comes to this is getting clear on the reason as to why you want to stop doing this thing and what would be the outcome if you were to continue to. So let's just say 10 years from now, for me, if I was an ice addict still, 10 years from now, if I was an ice addict and I was still doing the things I used to do, to be fair, I'd probably be dead. And if not, I'd definitely be in jail, because the only time I wasn't high was when I was locked up. So that was a big wake up call for me. So think about it, okay? If you really want to stop doing the thing that you're doing, what is going to be the outcome if you continue it? Okay, what's it going to stop you from having? What's it going to stop you from achieving? What's it going to mean that you won't have in your life, or that you have less of, or that what's going to be the hindrance, right? And then the second thing is, how will life be without it? So start to visualize and get really clear on how much better life would be without it. Because the thing is, even though you might not have experienced that, the human brain doesn't know the difference between a visualized experience and a lived experience. So if you can start to visualize what life is going to be like without this thing in it, and you can start to feel how good that feels, well, in turn, you can start to act in accordance with that without actually having to be there in the first place. So top three things. Number one, identify where the habit is or where it actually came from. Number two, identify the 1% small change. And number three, get really clear on what life will be like without it and how much better life will be when you get rid of that thing. So whether it be addiction, whether it be breaking a habit or anything like that, remember, at the end of the day, a lot of these things are only a symptom of self-worth. So if that's something you're struggling with, then feel free to reach out, because that is what I do when it comes to my one-on-one coaching and also group coaching. I work on habits and self-worth. Worst case scenario, you jump on, we have a quick chat, and hopefully I can point you in the right direction of some resources that might be able to help you. In best case scenario, we work together and you start to live as your happiest, healthiest self. I'll see you on the next episode.